And house prices really matter to all of us, not just Aucklanders, right? So this is, in the blue is the house price growth every year, and the brown, in the blue is the house price growth every year, and the brown is the GDP. So it really marries up quite nicely, and it has a big impact on the other, and that makes sense. If the value of your house is going up, gee, you might say, oh, let's renovate the kitchen, or let's go on a nice holiday. You know, we've made a couple of $100,000 on the value of our house. So you generally, your propensity to spend as a consumer goes up. But as soon as house prices start to turn, then you go, gee, I better start paying down some of the mortgage. You know, let's not worry about that overseas holiday we were going to take. So it does sort of have an impact on GDP. And you can see. This is going back to 2000, it's a real relationship there. Certainly here, GDP's been holding up well, and despite house prices falling. So it'll be interesting to see which one plays catch up. Does GDP start to fall from here to catch house prices, or do house prices move back up? And that's something to watch over the next sort of 6 months. This one should be a relatively scary chart for some of you. So how many people in this room have a mortgage? Anyone? Okay, so it won't be scary for many people because you guys are all paid your house off. So this blue line is household debt to income. So we started in the 80s at about 50%. We're at 160 now. We're doing better than the Aussies though. They're about 190, 180. So they're even higher than us. Now what I've done there is, if you just look at the people that have got a mortgage, well, they're up at 350% of household income. So, you know, if they're making 100 grand a year as a household, they've got 350,000 in debt. It's quite a big number. It shows you that a lot of our debt is sitting in housing. So, you know, if that chart I showed where 30 years of interest rates going one way, if that starts to turn the other way, then those people will have to really think about how they service that debt. Because what you've seen at the moment is interest rates have gone down, and that debt has gone up. But it hasn't been an issue because one's offset the other. So your debt servicing, the interest rate or the interest you have to pay every week or every month, has been relatively flat. When interest rates start to turn and you have to service that bigger debt, then it becomes a real issue. And again, that probably puts the handbrake on consumer spending, because people go, I won't go and buy a new car, I'll pay down some of my debt. But the regions are doing okay. You know, some of the main centres are certainly struggling. You look at Auckland there. This is Westpac's regional economic confidence. The brown is June quarter, and the blue is September quarter. So look at Auckland, you guys unfortunately aren't feeling that great about yourselves at the moment, according to Westpac anyway. So I think that's got a little bit to do with the housing market. Gee, you've had a great run, you shouldn't be ungrateful about it, but it's starting to slow down a little bit. Waikato, you know, they're not crash hot. And I think that's, despite the dairy payout being strong, it's the woes of Fonterra at the moment, and the farmers are starting to get a little bit worried about, hey, what's going to happen with our big cooperative. The only other one that's sort of a little bit soft is Taranaki, and I suspect, again, dairy has something to do with that, but the government's view on oil and gas, you know, it's a big oil and gas sector, so that's got a little bit to do with it. But besides those guys, you know, the rest of the country looks okay. Everyone's pretty upbeat about things, so, and I think, you know, housing prices and job growth and all those things in the regions are doing okay. So those people are all feeling pretty good about themselves, and that's important for New Zealand, right? We can't just be reliant on Auckland, we've got to make sure that the regions are doing okay. So that's really fast forwarded on sort of locally. I won't labour too much on global, but I just wanted to give you a bit of a snapshot of how we're thinking about, you know, the bigger picture more broadly. So I'll use interest rates again here because I think it's quite interesting. In the blue is our OCR, and it's tracked all the way down here, but since about 2016 it hasn't moved at all. The central bank hasn't had to do a lot, they've just sort of sat on their hands, and you know, obviously they're doing a lot of work, but in terms of changing the interest rate, they've sat on their hands. In the meantime, this is the US. The last time that they were at the same or higher than our interest rates was back in 2000. They've just broken through that now. You know, and that's a real change, and these guys will go higher. They'll go 3 or 4 more hikes in the next 12 months. Adrian Orr, our governor, said, we're probably not going to move for a year. We're probably going to stay where we are. And when we move, he still doesn't know if it's going to be up or down. So you got a real shift in what we've seen for a long time. Remember through here, the US were almost at zero, and they were printing money to sort of keep their businesses going and keep the economy going. And now they're starting to move really, really strongly, and they're having to try and put the brakes on it. And that's what interest rates do. They're an accelerator pedal, they're a brake. They're an accelerator through here, and now the brakes are starting to go on. That's effectively how you can think about that. And this explains why the last of that brown line is starting to turn. This is manufacturing PMI, which is a pretty good proxy for how an economy is doing. And the bright red one there is the US. If you're above this black line, you're in positive territory. That's break even. So every economy, sort of the larger ones that I've picked out here, is doing okay. The US especially. So that's why you're starting to see those interest rates rise. And what's that doing to us? Well, the interest rates rising means that US dollar goes stronger, and comparatively the Kiwi dollar, where the interest rates aren't moving, is softer. So that's why we're seeing our currency come off a long way, probably about 10% in the last year against the US. The other sort of point of note on this one is the blue line. That's the Eurozone. So, gee, they were doing really, really well. And then here, someone decided that Brexit was a good idea. So that's come all the way back, and that's not going to turn the other way until that stalemate is fixed. Poor old Theresa May still can't get a deal to go through. So when it does happen, and what form that takes will dictate if that line starts to catch the US or whether it comes back down to some of the other economies. And then just on trade wars, look, I won't labour this point, but this chart hopefully gives you some context of why we're having this trade war between Trump and the Chinese. If you look back here, 1991, that blue line is the US economy, the red line is the Chinese economy. In 91, the US economy was about 15 times bigger than the Chinese economy. So, China wasn't even on the radar back there. You go fast forward to today, and it's only 1.6 times larger. So what you've seen is China become a real powerhouse in the world. And what you're seeing is a jostling for position, basically. The big incumbent doesn't want to give up number one spot, the big dog doesn't want to give it up, and China is coming up quickly. So I think you're seeing more of that come through in the trade wars, and I don't see that easing off anytime soon. I think Trump is going to continue to be an angst and antagonise the Chinese, and that's basically because his voter base thinks that because of this trade, the Chinese are stealing US jobs and things like steel. So as long as his voters think he's doing the right thing, he's not going to stop. So I think that is a risk for all of us, but it's certainly a big risk for these two nations. And this is how it sort of impacts us. These are our top three trading partners: China, Aussie, and the US. Now the saving grace for us is our big export products, dairy, logs, meat, and tourism. We're not really stealing US jobs in a lot of those. So we're not really on Trump's radar. I'd be surprised if he knew where New Zealand was on that, to be honest. We're just a byproduct of what he does at the moment. But I think we're okay because we sort of export things that he's not really worried about. But regardless of that, there'll be a knock-on effect. If China slows, then Australia slows. Remember, Australia is a big partner of China. So overall, for us, it is something we need to keep an eye on. We're a big export industry, so nothing direct, but indirect, there'll be a knock-on effect to us. And this is a nice way of just showing how big China has become for us. So this is our top 10 exports for goods by value over the last sort of few periods. So look back to 2000, that baby blue line, that baby blue pie bit, that's China. That's how important they were to us in 2000. Aussie's the brown one, and US is in the lighter brown. You fast forward to 2008, just before the GFC, we had a massive mining boom. So the Aussies were consuming like crazy. They were paying huge amounts of money to go dig holes, basically, and they were making a lot of money by exporting that to China. So through this period, China was industrializing, and so they were getting bigger, but they still weren't huge for us. Then you come through to 2018, or the year to date so far, and China's now about 30% of our goods exports. So they're a real key part of our equation in terms of the New Zealand economy. Aussie's still pretty big, but obviously mining sort of slowed down over that last little while, so they've become a smaller part. The US hasn't really changed a lot over that period. It still stayed the same. And then if you're thinking, gee, some of those, that red line I showed with the US going gangbusters, Eurozone's still doing okay. I want access to those economies. I think, migration in New Zealand might slow. And some of that unemployment might turn. Something might go wrong in New Zealand. Hey, I want to get some money offshore. Well, you don't necessarily need to leave the NZX. So here's a dozen companies that are listed on the NZX that have big exposures offshore in terms of their revenues. So I've picked 12, and 80% on average of those revenues are offshore. So when you're buying companies on the New Zealand Stock Exchange, you're not necessarily buying the domestic economy. You're buying some world-class companies that are operating all over the world. So don't be thinking that I've got to go offshore to buy on the Aussie exchange or the US or whatever. Certainly we think you should have some money over there, but locally you can still get pretty good exposure to those global thematics. And these guys will all do well when our currency falls. It's a great buffer for them. So as our currency softens, these guys will make a bit more money. So that's sort of global again, fast forward. I just want to finish with 3 slides. I'm running tight on time. And hopefully these are of something of interest to you guys. And I use this one because I just don't want a question. I want to front run this potential question that might come, and I suspected it would come from Auckland. This is the sort of, I guess, the theoretical cycle of a bubble. So you go through this takeoff. There's some sell-offs here, there's enthusiasm, all the way up to, gee, it's a new paradigm. Then it's sort of, people start to get a little bit worried here, but go, no, things are okay. And then eventually you get to despair. And the point is that you go through all of these emotions, and actually your returns are tracking somewhere along here. Pretty mundane, but you're going on a roller coaster ride. Can anyone guess what that is?
Bitcoin.
That's Bitcoin. That's done almost exactly the same thing. It's somehow stopping itself from this despair bit. It's keeping up, but certainly it shows you that all it's really done is that, and you've been along for the ride along the way. And there's a lot of people that probably got some media attention up here and bought it, and now they're paying the price for it. So not everything that you hear in the media that's exciting is a real valuable asset to own. And then just to pour some cold water on everyone. These red triangles, that's the 5-year average, the 25-year average return of each of these asset classes. So over the last 25 years on average, US, NZ, even world shares, somewhere between 10 and 8%. The bars are the last 5 years. So if you've invested 3 or 4 years ago, you've put money in the New Zealand market or the US market, you're going, geez, this is easy. I've made 15% a year, like I'll keep doing this forever. Well, just remember that that's actually the last 25 years in terms of the average. And more importantly, you might get a couple of years down here, so make sure you're prepared for that. Don't just think that this is the number that you're going to get forever. Be more mindful that this is more reasonable, these numbers down here. Auckland house prices are not far off their average anyway, so they have been going up for a long, long time. And then the very last one to leave you with, and again, I promised Joanna I wouldn't throw her under the bus, but if you can guess this, she'll buy you a beer, which is probably free anyway from the back. But you can guess what this chart is. Any ideas what that chart is of? So, because I've got no time, that is the price of a Queensland taxi licence. Right through to 2016, it cost you about $350,000 to go and buy a taxi licence of someone else. And then something happened in 2016 in Australia, and now you pay 80 grand, 70 grand for a license. It's not worth a huge amount. And that was obviously Uber. So it really disrupted a business model that we probably thought was pretty safe and been around for a long time. So my last thought to leave you with is just think about disruption and think about the companies that you're invested in. Can they sort of fend off any disruption? Have they got a quality business model that will grow over the next 10, 15, 20 years? Or on the flip side, think about companies that you can invest in that are those disruptors like Uber. And I guess on the NZX, one company that looks relatively similar to that is Sky TV. Its share price unfortunately looks something like that, and that's because of Netflix. So again, a business model which we all loved for a long time, and we're probably all, a lot of people in the room with Sky subscribers. and then Netflix came in and really disrupted that. So it can happen, so don't just put your stocks in the bottom drawer and forget about them. Make sure you're mindful of this disruption potential. I used up my full 25 minutes.
Are there any questions? Just quickly, so we don't short time to
Your very first slide showing migration is going to drop down. There's quite strong suggestions that the Chinese are going to more than compensate for the fall. And it might go back up again. Is that your view?
That migration will go back up?
Yeah.
Um,
First slide.
Sorry, I'll just get through it.
That one, yeah.
The only point I would make is, look at it over time. You know? So, it's cyclical. Yeah, it's the fortunes, through here, when the fortunes of Aussie were a lot better than ours, you know, this blue line is Kiwis leaving home. There's almost 40,000 people leaving home. So, it just depends what the rest of the world is doing. At the moment, you've got all that Brexit stuff going on, so Kiwis don't want to go to the UK. You know, the mining boom has sort of ended, although it's starting to turn a little bit, but the Aussie economy is hard work. Their politicians change every week, so you don't want to go over there, right? So that's why people are staying here. You know, on a relative basis, we look okay. I think if you start to see our economy slow and job prospects are not as pretty as they've been in the past, then that blue line will turn. And at the same time, well, if migrants can't come here and there's an abundance of jobs, then they'll stop for a while, right? As they've done in the past. So, look, it's hard to know, but I think it's going to ease off naturally. Even though, you know, Labor and Winston sort of campaigned on what they wanted to soften, I think natural factors will make it soften. And at the moment, you know, like I said, the big sort of handbrake for businesses is getting access to staff and good staff. So, the fact that we've got these people wanting to come and work here is, I think it's a good thing. It's good for our economy. I don't know which way it goes over the long term.
There are two consequences of that. The first one is the growth of infrastructure spending. So we've got to have an infrastructure catch up. And the other one, which at the moment seems to be a little under the radar, is there's one huge baby boom getting underway.
Yep.
The immigrants are now breeding. And if you're a JP, you get less.
There's only 70,000 of them. They're not going to make too much of a difference with that breeding. Yeah, the only point I would make is, yes, it's a double-edged sword. Okay, so yeah, you put pressure on schools, roads.
Yeah.
But what funds all that is tax take.
Yeah.
Yeah. If they're all got jobs, look at our unemployment number. They're all coming here to work. They're not coming here to sit on the dole.
Yep.
So they're contributing. There's a tax take from that, which allows us, you know. Otherwise, our GDP looks somewhere down here. So, yeah, absolutely right. It's pressure on one side, but you can't have your cake and eat it. You've either got to have more migration, and you get the tax take and the population growth comes with GDP growth, or you say, hey, we don't want that, but we're happy to be down here and we get no wage growth, and as an economy we don't grow because all those exporters are handbraked by the ability to grow.
Yeah. Conversely, that creates another issue associated with your GDP line relative to borrowing. Borrowing is going up fairly rapidly.
Yeah, and I'll finish on this, Joanna, because if anyone else has got questions, I'm sticking around. Yeah, I put that up. That's household. That's household debt, right? 160%. We've got one of the lowest government debt levels in the developed world. We're at about 25-30% of GDP. The US is at 90, Japan's at 200 and something. So if this becomes an issue, consumer debt becomes an issue, right? We've still got this big lever to pull that the government can actually open up its books and its wallet and go and spend on infrastructure. And I think that's a real lever that a lot of other economies don't have, but we do.
Yeah.
So I'll just stop there.
Thank you. As Mo said, he will be around later to answer any questions, because I'd like to, doing that, I'd like to invite Donna.
Gosh, I'm pleased I didn't put any graphs in mine. Thanks, man. Main freight. For those of you that think we're a trucking company, any analyst that comes to see us doesn't need a second interview, they call us a trucking company. We're a global supply chain logistics provider, and we have three products. That's air and ocean, so we move air freight, we move ocean freight. We do a lot of warehousing, and we do a lot of domestic transportation. And likely all of that in all the countries that we're in, which are 22, soon to become 24. 7,635 people who are our competitive advantage. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The key is the linking of the three products for the customers, so that we provide supply chain management for those customers. We provide the inbound, say, from China, because we are in China. Mo, I see you will see us in Asia. We are in China. We bring it in from Asia, cart it off the wharf, customs clear it, put it away in the warehouse, receive the orders, pick and pack, and deliver. That's the full supply chain. And we do that in all the countries, all around the world. Where are we? Europe, Western Europe, really strong. Netherlands, Belgium, France. We're across into Germany, we're across into Romania, Poland, and Russia. We move a lot of domestic freight across borders, move a lot of freight in and out, and we do a lot of logistics there. We're in Asia, where we are strong in China and now developing through Southeast Asia, strong in the Americas, including Mexico, including Canada, and a little bit in Chile, and of course Australia and New Zealand. So the strategy of Mainfreight is to intensify that network. So as an example, we've just bought some more land out west here to get us closer to our customers. So running full line haul vehicles from the bottom of the North Island and the South Island into the far west of the city and deliver within a 10 to 15 kilometre radius, rather than unloading all of that in our South Auckland headquarters and jamming these roads that the infrastructure requires to be changed, where we push the freight on multiple smaller vehicles out to all points in Auckland. Now we do that everywhere. We want to intensify the network both within the country, within the city, and of course as we grow the business around the world. A little example of what we do for a customer, say someone like Moa Hennessy in Australia. Firstly, when we gained that business 15 years ago, we warehoused only in Sydney. Their customers were throughout Australia, and whilst they wanted us to deliver to those customers, and that was good for the distribution business, for the freight business, actually made a lot of sense for us to be in every major capital city of Australia. We would warehouse for them, and the delivery would only be within that state. So we lost less freight, but we became more efficient for the customer, therefore fulfilling their supply chain requirements. We're in freight, we're not in courier, we're not in parcels. So we're not exposed to the e-commerce world. So we don't do any clothing, fashion, handbags, shoes. Mostly it's food and beverage, DIY type product, and it's all freight. We add value with the supply chain with high visible technology that we develop ourselves, which the customer can use from the moment that the product is either exported or imported to the time that it's delivered. And we have this high quality, easy to do business with attitude in terms of our customers. The key differentiator for us is our people, our culture. It's a very strong culture we want to promote from within. So young grads starting with the business on the floor, loading freight, learning the business until they're promoted from within. So this people thing that Mo talks about, yes, it's difficult to find people, but actually if you're promoting from within and providing a career, not a job, and rewarding those people really well, we don't want to be at the minimum wage level, we don't want to be at the living wage level, we pay more than that, and we'll provide them with a long-term career anywhere in the world. And that culture for us is engaging those people, having the decision making as close to the customers. So the guys and the girls who are picking the product, who are loading the freight, they make the decision for the customer. If they make a mistake, they fix the mistake. It's not shunted 3 floors up to the senior management team to decide. So the responsibility is to those closest to the customer. So that decentralised management structure, 252 branches that we've got, each one of them has their own P&L. Each one of those reports their profit and loss on a Monday night, no matter where they are in the world. More importantly, they understand what that P&L says and what decisions they made the week before as to whether they made money or lost money. And then more importantly, they take that P&L and put it on the cafeteria wall for everybody in the business to see. So that they worked their butts off last week, and actually what did it do to the profit. And then of course we share some of that profit. We take 11% of the profit before tax at the end of the financial year and split that evenly across everybody in the business. So they share in those profitable gains. So in the last financial year, we've just paid out $20.9 million to people all around the world, providing they were in a branch that made a profit. They shared in that bonus. There are no hierarchical structures. I don't have a car park with my name on it. I don't have an office. Nor does anybody else. It's all open plan. We share the information, the profits, the KPIs all go on the wall for everyone to see. And we're looking for our people to have a career, not a job. For our customers, they're in excess of 40,000. And in those food, beverage, retail, DIY type products. So anything that you buy at Mitre 10, we've moved. If you're in Australia, anything you buy at Bunnings, we've likely to have moved it. If you talk to the DIY guys, they say they don't mind recessions because if you don't sell your house, you'll actually fix the kitchen, as Mark said. Or if you sell your house and you move in, you want to fix the kitchen anyway. But it's a great business to be involved in. But we're not exposed to that fashion sector, so we're not exposed to the e-commerce sector. I was with a large customer in the Netherlands last week, a company called Rituals, fastest growing retail business in the world, 36% compounding growth over the last 10 years. And they're opening stores everywhere, every week, and within Europe. And their e-commerce portion is only at 8%. They're still opening brick store, clicks and bricks. And they think ultimately they will only get to about 20% of e-commerce. So they still see that retail will have a big role to play. We prefer those customers to trade across all those divisions. So lots of the businesses that we've got around the world trade with us in lots of the different regions. So take John Deere as an example. We actually run a manufacturing line and a warehouse for them in Europe. But we also trade with them here in Australia, in New Zealand, and also in Australia. And they're asking for us to quote for some work around Asia and America. So when you get exposed to those markets offshore, you get exposed to their trade across different markets. When we got to China, it wasn't necessarily for the exports or the imports from New Zealand, or Australia for that matter. And very quickly, the market between China and the USA outstripped whatever we sent to and from China, from New Zealand and Australia. So once you access those bigger markets, you have a great deal of opportunity to grow your business quickly. Quality in everything that we do. So we have a high service criteria. And we don't want to be at the commodity end. So with due respect to Coca-Cola, if anyone is from Coca-Cola in the room, we don't want Coca-Cola to the DC. 100 truckloads of Coca-Cola with a very small margin. We'd rather deal with the competitor of Coca-Cola who's got 10 pallets that has to be delivered in full on time every day with a high level of service. Just because it's topical, governance. We don't necessarily bow to the Institute of Directors governance folder. We don't have directors who tick the boxes, to be perfectly frank. We like our directors to be around for a very long time. We like Carl Howard Smith, who has just retired from us. He started with the business in 1978. He was there when we listed. But that experience that we have around the table is about guiding the management of the business to growing a bigger business. The last board meeting that the board attended, we only have 5. The 5th one is the AGM in the middle of the year. The other 4, they travel. So in the June board meeting, they left for Melbourne, then went to Sydney, then went to Shanghai, then finished in Amsterdam. That took 12 days. And every day waking hour, they got a blue injection in the arm, they met customers and they met our people. And they become very knowledgeable as they sit around the table having to make CapEx decisions or land buying decisions. Around the table we have about 20%, 20.5% held by the directors. And our dividend policy is 40 to 50% of net profit. We're investing the rest of it in the growth of the business. The assets, 1.4 billion, land and buildings, 483 million, and we'll continue to build more buildings as we intensify this network. It's the key differentiator amongst not only our people, but also the way we build the buildings. If we want to attract really good people to work for us, we've got to provide very good premises, very good facilities for them to operate in. We don't own a lot of trucks. We don't own any trucks in New Zealand, Australia or America, only in Europe. And our technology, we develop ourselves other than our air and ocean business. Our capital expenditure for the next financial year will be 150 million, the majority of that in land and buildings as we intensify this network. Just have a look at what those results were to the 31st of March. Our half year is due middle of November. We're going okay, but that's about all I can talk about. So for the full year result, 2.6 billion, EBITDA up 9%, group net up 8.8%. We paid a dividend of 45 cents, that was up nearly 10%. And as I said before, we shared 20.7 million of that with our people all around the world. So to close, we continue to be really confident and positive about the market. I find that interesting, that little stat that Mo gave about business confidence. I was at the Mood of the Boardroom thing yesterday, and I would suggest that it's big business that has got some sort of downer on the economy right now as to where your stats at for the Auckland market, and we've got no idea why they want to feel that way. All those things you're talking about in terms of regional growth, we definitely feel that, and certainly with that immigrant population, they're eating, they're drinking, and that's the freight that we're moving. So we feel quite positive about the economy here, but of course we look at the economy with a bit more of a global view. So it doesn't matter whether China has a fight with America, or America want to have a fight with everybody else. It just means that the trade patterns change. And whilst China might not trade with America, you can bet your bottom dollar they're actually preparing themselves to trade with Europe and to trade more with Southeast Asia. And that just means more opportunity for us. Brexit is an opportunity for us, because if it means that they need to have customs clearances from Europe into the UK, or from the UK into Europe, that's more opportunity for us to give a service to the customer. So wherever there is fiscal or economic disruption, there are opportunities for us to be involved. So as we continue to grow, and we will, around the world, more countries within each of those countries will continue to develop. And of course, the capital investment that we're making on those facilities that we're providing is getting us closer to the customers and providing far better services. And we're having a crack at painting the world painting it blue, one pot at a time. Right on my 15 minutes. That's the quick version of mainframe. Is there any questions that I can answer? I'm not hanging around later, by the way. Yeah.
Obviously, you said people's your massive part of your company and your edge, as you said, competitive edge. How much research and how much I don't know, capital expenditure you're putting into technology, specifically AI, because I think supply chain logistics is definitely going that way with the world we live in.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I had a difficult discussion with the rituals business in Europe last week. They want us to go to a fully automated warehouse. Our competitive advantage is our people, so we don't want to lose our people. We have a current accuracy pick rate for that customer of 99.6%. And we have multiple customers in the warehouse, not just one. So therefore, to bring us down to a commodity level by introducing automated warehousing actually might make us more efficient. There's only a small amount of efficiency there to gain, but actually bring us a lot of trouble around our competitive advantage. And unless they want to sign a 15 to 20 year contract for us to invest in that equipment, and they're not sure that we should invest in that equipment, but just like us to test it for them? The answer is no. So we are automating, but slowly, and we'll never be at that leading edge. We always like to be number 2 or number 3. There's a lot to be said for the bleeding edge. So we don't want to be at the bleeding edge in our business. And we're in the LCL freight business, not in the FTL or commodity end. So we invest a lot of money in technology. We spend 50 to 55 million a year in technology, but not all of it about automation. Anything else? If you had put your shares in the bottom drawer a few years ago, the return is very
Next up, I'd like to invite Chief Operating Officer, who has recently been CFO as well at Sanford, so variety of roles, to talk to us about Sanford. Thank you.
Just start my clock, just make sure I'm in time. Sanford, any shareholders in the room? Oh, good, there's 3. I hope that by the end of it, there'll be more shareholders. Sanford, we are 137 years old as a company. It was started by Albert Sanford. He bought his first boat in 1864 and established the company in 1881. So it's been around for a while. And as Joanna sort of said, you know, we're probably the oldest listed company on the NZX at the moment. It was listed in 1904. So it's great for a company that has in the past been focusing on commodity, which I'll talk to you about a little more later, to be still around. And I think that's testament to the very strong foundation that the company has got. So from very humble beginnings, we today has established scale. We are the largest order holder of New Zealand fishing order. Number 1 in wild caught fish. Number 1 in terms of green shell mussels. We own the largest number of farms and water space to farm mussels all around New Zealand, and we've got farms in Coromandel, Marlborough, Canterbury, and down all the way to Stewart Island. And the ability to farm about 100,000 tonne of green weight tonne of mussels. Today we farm about 30, so there's still a massive ability for us to grow in that particular area. King salmon, we're number 2. We farm our salmon in Stewart Island, and we'll talk to you more about Big Glory Bay, where we farm salmon from as well. So every year we moved about 140 million kilograms of product. Don actually moved some of our products for us all over the world as well, and about $500 million in revenue. 49 vessels, 210 aquaculture farms, and 7 processing sites all around New Zealand, all the way from Auckland down to Bluff. A very diversified sort of revenue business. If you look at that, the wild catch business revenue F17 is about 69%, mussels 22, and salmon 8.8. And even if you look at the big chunk here in wild catch, it's broken down into quite a variety of different species. And that means to us is that we don't get exposed to one particular species. You probably heard recently in the news that the fishing industry had voluntarily shelved about 20,000 tonne of hoki. And for us, you know, that's about a 4,000 tonne impact, but we managed to buy some other hoki from other players. And so the impact to us is not that much. If you think about hoki on the scheme of things, 17.4%, but you know, in terms of our revenue is not that much compared to the rest of the species. And from a geography sort of point of view, we are one of those that's exposed to US dollars, so 35% of our revenue is in New Zealand, and we have purposefully sort of diversified the revenue back into the local market. So probably about 4 years ago, that number there, 35.4% of the local domestic sales is probably only about 13%. So we purposely have moved a lot of products into the domestic market. And the reason is because, you know, New Zealand is such an isolated sort of country, best profit always is starting here domestically. So fishing industry. So I'm going to talk to you about the good news. But when I say commercial fishing, what are the things that comes to mind to you guys? Trolling, pillaging the ocean, high sea slaveries, oil spills, and you name it. There's a lot of bad news connotation with the fishing industry. But you know what? The New Zealand fishing industry and the environment that we have got here in New Zealand is actually quite amazing. And I'll go through some of those things with you now. Globally, a massive demand for seafood. So this is the wild catch piece in the dark blue, and green is aquaculture. You can see aquaculture is growing significantly, and the demand is still growing as well. Wild catch has been very, very flat, and will continue to be very, very flat going forward, because there's no more that you can actually extract from the ocean, especially if you're doing it very sustainably, as New Zealand actually does. Extremely positive outlook in terms of global protein consumption, and if you look at that in terms of fish, 16% growth from 2014 to 2020. That's a massive growth potential still, and the projection is still extremely strong going forward. If you look at the forecasted seafood shortage, it's about 50 to 80 million tonne by 2030. New Zealand's entire TACC, which is the total available commercial catch for fish in New Zealand, entire New Zealand, is only 600 tonne. Yeah. A very low carbon footprint compared to other protein. If you look at here, in terms of seafood, in terms of fishery, yeah, compared to other protein is very low. Aquaculture, you know, one of the lowest, but 8 times lower carbon footprint compared to other protein manufacturing. And mussels, which is where we've got a very strong presence in, is actually potentially a carbon sink. We're doing a lot of research on that now. The mussel shells actually locked up carbon and nitrogen, so it's actually good for the environment. And we put the spat into the water, we actually don't have to feed it, and therefore there's no food conversion ratio. You hear about FCR, which is food conversion ratio. For salmon, for example, you put 1.7 kilograms of feed to get 1 kilograms of salmon back. Mussels, 0. Don't feed it. It just filters algae and grows naturally. So it's an amazing product for us going forward. So a bit of facts about the New Zealand seafood industry. That, I know it's a square. That's New Zealand EEZ, which is an exclusive economic zone. It's the 4th largest in the world. For a tiny nation like New Zealand, you wouldn't know that our sea, where we've got exclusive economic sort of control over, is the 4th largest in the world. Right? And that's about 4.1 square kilometers of water space that we've got out there as a country. We've got 130 different fish species in our ocean, and which we actually catch. You know, most countries, if you think about Europe, they catch 2 or 3 species. We catch 130 species. So the diversity of seafood here in New Zealand is amazing. Compared to our land mass, 268,000 square kilometers. So I'm trying to get this into scale, so they're about 6.5% compared to our waters. So very tiny compared to what we have got as waters. 45.3% of our land mass has been used for agriculture purposes. Right? So quite a big chunk has been used for agriculture purposes. Have a guess how much we actually use for agriculture. Out of this big blue ocean here, how much do you think that we've used for agriculture? As a percentage wise, anyone has a guess?
Less than 1%.
Less than 1%. 0.004%, or 151 kilometers, square kilometers. That little dot is what I'm trying to yeah, pictorially sort of say how much it is, and I have to make that dot a lot bigger as well to just to make it visible for people to see. So you can see the opportunity for New Zealand as a country in terms of agriculture, because the growth in demand is just going to grow, it's just going to continue to accelerate. You know, as a country, we sell about, or produce about 0.4% of the global consumption for seafood. Right? We're tiny, we're very, very, very tiny. And yet, we have been commodity focused as a country, as a company. This is Sanford Sal from 2017. That blue bar there, in terms of volume, are commodity product, and the orange bar is our value product. So 82% of what we've sold in the past is still into the commodity market. New Zealand as a country produced about 150,000 tonne of hoki. We've shelved 20, now it's 130,000 tonne of hoki for this year. And yet we send that product in block form to Europe, and we compete with pork and cod, and they produce about 4.5 to 5 million tonne a year. And we lost all, there's no mention of New Zealand, there's no mention of hoki, it's just white fish. And it goes into blocks, it gets cut up into fish fingers and crumbed, and goes to supermarket, and no one knows the fish comes from New Zealand. We need to change that. And we've got little or no control of pricing, which means, you know, I've got 100 million kilograms of product driving volatility in my profitability and revenue. So we, as a company, we decided to change. You know, we have to focus on sustainability. We've got a massive, really good story to tell as a nation in terms of the fishing and aquaculture side of the business. We focus on value, which means it's branding. Brand essence is uncompromising care. Every single thing that we do out there in the ocean or on land is about uncompromising care, making sure that we take care of the environment, our people, and the product. Innovation into fresh, and the fresh piece is amazing, right? Yeah, for fresh fish, I can get probably about $2 or $3 per kilogram more than frozen fish. And the good news for me, and I love this when I was CFO, is that, you know, delivering fresh fish to a customer or consumer is actually cheaper than delivering frozen fillet to the customer, because I'm not adding any value. My value add is actually not touching the food. The customers and the consumer trend is, tell me where my food comes from, don't touch it, don't add anything to it, I just want it as pristine as I possibly can on my plate. And then I'll show you something in terms of what we're doing in terms of nutraceuticals as well, and increasing transparency. I was just talking to Mo just now. You know, when I first started with Sanford about 4 years ago as CFO, I had meetings with analysts, and they sit there sort of going like this, and they go, we don't follow Sanford, we don't analyze Sanford because it's a black box, and you guys never talk to us. And you know, you never tell us any information. So we've chosen the integrated reporting with GRI to actually be extremely transparent. If you look at our report today, in terms of our annual report, you know, we show you everything that's there, good, bad, or indifferent. We catch dolphins accidentally, we put it there. It's not a good thing for, you know, a seafood company. That's one thing I dread now as you know, COO. Just 2 days ago, I got a text from one of my staff saying a Maui dolphin had just washed up on the shore on the west coast. My heart just sank. It's like, this would be the worst thing if it is something that is relating to us. We've taken protection in terms of what we do. Good news is there's a natural mortality, nothing to do with the fishing industry, so that's good. We've taken protection in the sense of, with the Maui dolphin, we're saying that, you know, we're not going to support anyone who set nets, because that's what is the most dangerous activity to Maui dolphins, set netting inside the harbour. And so as a company, we've decided that we're not going to support anyone who actually set nets. We don't do set netting ourselves. We don't supply any of our annual catch entitlement to anyone who does set netting as well. And what we want to do is to actually help those set netters away from set netting into a better space that is away from the Maui dolphin habitat. Yeah? So turning our focus to food and brand and innovation. We've got amazing stories to tell. We've got amazingly beautiful backyard in New Zealand. We have to sell that story. We must not be in commodity. And if you look at where we are selling our story, anyone been to Stewart Island? There's quite a few. I'm surprised. Well done. Because I've talked to a lot of Kiwis, and a lot of people have never been to Stewart Island. It's an amazingly, pristinely beautiful part of our country. And this is where we farm our salmon. Our salmon is New Zealand. We only produce 15,000 tonnes of king salmon. Globally, is only about 30,000 tonnes of king salmon. Atlantic salmon, on the other hand, is produced in Norway and globally everywhere in the world. King salmon only in New Zealand, and some wild production in North America. Norway alone by itself, 1.2 million tonnes of Atlantic salmon. We need to differentiate our product and differentiate it. The environment that it's come from. And the other place that we are working on in terms of utilizing all the waste products of our fish, I think Joanna mentioned that, and turning it into something that's high value. And this one here we're very proud of. It's just starting, so it's still small, but the potential is amazing going forward.
If you had to guess what this is, you probably wouldn't say it's a nanofibre made from fish skins. But that's exactly what it is. A nanofibre tissue that dissolves completely, delivering collagen deep inside the skin. And testing has shown it can reduce facial wrinkles by more than 30%. We'll get to that, but first we need to start here, with fresh fish, caught by Sanford, New Zealand's biggest and oldest seafood company.
Well, at Sanford, we're trying to be the best seafood company that we can be. The best seafood company in the world is our ultimate goal, and this is part of the drive to utilise as much of the materials as we have available to us, part of a wider extracts program.
Yeah, science is a big part of what we're trying to do at Sanford now, particularly trying to utilise our fish stocks better and in a more sustainable manner. So that's taking a lot of our waste and byproducts and putting them to better use.
The process of putting them to better use starts here. This is Plant and Food in Nelson, where scientists have developed the technology to extract the collagen from the fish skins.
Collagen is structural protein. 30% of our dry body weight is collagen. So our bones, our tendons, it's in the liquid in your eye, it's in the discs in your back, it's the extracellular matrix that all the cells are in. So it's a very important protein in the body.
The collagen then heads to Revolution Fibres, where the next bit of magic happens.
So we create nanofibres by putting a polymer, in this case collagen, into a high voltage field, and the fibre collects from one side to the other.
That nanofibre is then spun into the face masks you see here. Revolution Fibres thinks these will be a revolution in skincare.
Nanofibres have a unique structure in that they are very, very thin. They're able to hold in them a number of other substances, natural extracts that can be included in the formulation. It's the first application of this type like this.
We've been working closely with Otago University School of Medicine to track how our fibres dissolve and penetrate the skin. And what we're seeing is very deep long-lasting penetration of the active ingredients as well as the collagen.
The technology has the potential to do more than just fight wrinkles. It should soon have medical applications too.
Our aim by 2020 is to have a medical product on the market. We believe it's got a lot of potential in drug delivery, anything from burns to treating acne, treating skin lesions and diabetic ulcers. So it's got a huge amount of potential.
Revolution Fibre's face masks are about to launch into Asia. From there, its home market in New Zealand will follow. Sanford will be partnering with Revolution Fibres all the way.
Well, I'd like to think Sanford is our knight in shining armour, if you like. They really came to us when we were in quite a bind. We needed a big scale up. There wasn't the market there, so we needed a company that could share the vision of where this technology could go. They took the R&D and they turned it into a manufacturing process very quickly, very professionally, and they've just been great partners.
So, you know, from a waste product into face mask, you don't know this, but I'm 70 years old. You know, how amazing is that? If we can do more of this to our precious resource out there in the ocean, we don't have to take the volume. We just take, you know, and use every single thing that we take out of the ocean and put it into high value products like this. You know, the skin for this is about 30 times better value than going into fish food. So that's amazing. I think I'm sort of running out of time, I'm going faster. And the other piece is, this is the spat NZ. This is where we actually grow the spat for the mussels, so the little seeds for the mussels. In the past, in terms of mussel industry, we get spat from 99 Mile Beach, and sometimes it washes up on the beach, and we collect it in the seaweed, and then we've got mussel to grow. If years when it actually didn't wash up, then there's no mussels to grow. So there's massive risk, and with this, in terms of hatchery, the first one of its kind in the world, we can actually grow the spat ourselves, and so it's a lot more control. And the other thing is that the mussels that we grow from here are more uniform and grows faster. So it's a massive opportunity for us in that space. We talk about this in terms of building trust through transparency. We've gone from not telling anyone anything to telling anyone everything now. And it was a difficult thing for us to convince our board to say, let's be open. It's not easy, but we've got there. So this is our, I think, 4th year of doing that. So let's do the right thing. We don't have a plan B. We only have one ocean, and we have to be sustainable. In terms of the asset value on our books, $500 million of the $750 million of asset sits in our water holding and our water space holding. If we don't do it sustainably, we will lose our business going forward. So we have only one plan, and that's to do it sustainably. Shifting towards ESG in terms of environmental, social, and governance, and global trade and consumer choice towards ethical reasons, and that's what we are as a company. And social license to operate is a massive, important thing for us. Without that, without the social license from New Zealanders, we cannot operate the water of New Zealanders. And so for us, that's a critical #1 focus for us, doing the right thing. Challenges remain though, industry cohesion. We still have people wanting to import salmon from other parts of the world into the country, and many other things. And our company culture in terms of moving away from that volume commodity focus into lower volume, higher value product is a challenge. I suppose that's my challenge now to turn it around. Doing okay so far in terms of EBITDA. If you look at that, has been growing pretty good from when we started our journey, which is probably here. Volker, our CEO, started here, and changing the focus of the company from commodity into value is paying dividends. Our share price, if you held your shares for a long period of time, we have found that almost doubled value from 4 years ago. Thank you very much. We buy our shares.
In the long term, is your goal to shift from pure wild catch to aquaculture as well?
I think wild catch is going to be flat in terms of volume. What the wild catch strategy is about adding value to it, like the collagen utilizing the entire fish, moving out the cascade in terms of hoki rather than block into fillets, and then call it hoki, call out New Zealand. Aquaculture is where the growth is. So as I said before, we've got 30,000 ton green weight of mussels. We can grow it to 100,000 ton, and we've got, we are very, very well placed in terms of mussels. We've got the largest water space. We've got the hatchery. We are the only company that's got the automatic mussel opener, and we've got good channels going into the market. So I think that's where we need to grow. And we just bought a powder plant as well, growing into the powder into oil, diversification of product.
Thank you. I'd like to now invite Ashley, which is from Marlin Global, but nothing to do with fishing, but coincidence in that one. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you. Yeah, I was wondering if that timing was a coincidence or not. It's quite hard to catch marlin, by the way. And I also happen to work for Fisher Fund, so there's another.
I missed that one, sorry.
Yeah, so good evening all. I'm Ashley Gardine. I'm the Senior Portfolio Manager at Fisher Funds, and I'm responsible for marlin. So what I wanted to do tonight was talk a bit about marlin. I'll give you an overview of marlin, which is a listed investment company listed on the NZX. I'll talk about sort of the current shape of the portfolio, some of the investments we have, and touching on some of the themes around disruption that Mo spoke about earlier. So just the usual disclaimer to start. But first of all, and again, as Mo touched on, there are a lot of great companies on the NZX, and a lot of these companies actually have a large percentage of their revenue and profits from offshore. And from talking to our investors, we know that a lot of investors like this. They like to be able to invest in quality New Zealand businesses that have a decent chunk of their revenue offshore for some diversification. But we also know there are lots of shareholders in New Zealand that like a bit more direct access to international share markets. And you can get that through the NZX, either through the ETFs that are listed on the exchange or through some of the listed investment companies. So what my role is, and what Marlin's role is, to try and manage some of the complexity of investing actively in international shares on behalf of our shareholders. So just to start with a few of the basics, we're a listed investment company. We manage a hand-picked portfolio of high quality and growing businesses. We invest in businesses across quite a wide range of different countries, but also sectors, and a number of these sectors you can't really access easily in New Zealand. So this could be online payments, it could be e-gaming, it could be digital advertising, some of the large B2C e-commerce players. So we have a really diverse portfolio of different businesses that it's hard to access directly in New Zealand. And then just finally, portfolio is actively managed, and we have quite a concentrated approach. There are 3 of us in the team. Between us, we manage just 25 positions, so we're quite selective in the way we operate. Now, and then some of the companies you'll definitely recognise. As you can see, we've got a lot of leading brands, the Googles, the MasterCards, Adidas. Pretty easy to see that they are global leaders, number 1 or 2 in their markets generally, and household names. But then at the bottom of the slide, there are lots of companies that you probably don't recognise that are also in the portfolio. But the common thread is they are equally, generally number 1 or 2 in their markets. And actually a few of them, while you might not recognise the logos, you probably have interacted with them in some way. So the orange logo towards the bottom, Zoetis, is the global leader in animal healthcare. So if you have a pet and you're taking your pet to the vet at some point, chances are you've probably used a Zoetis product. So we actually invested in Zoetis a few years ago after it spun off from a huge pharmaceutical company called Pfizer that you may have heard of. Management took that business, kind of smaller business, really streamlined it, took a lot of cost out, rationalised their manufacturing footprint, and have really been able to grow quite rapidly for a business that's got quite good defensive characteristics. The second logo there, a company called Hexcel, again you may not have come across, but it's the global leader in carbon fibre composites for aircraft. So pretty much any aircraft you've been on the last few years will have some Hexcel parts on it. It's a sort of industry that's hard to break into. To get certified to make parts for Boeing or Airbus, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of cost. So it's the sort of business that we like, and it's got a lot of growth ahead because aircraft manufacturers are generally moving away from aluminium and steel as much as they can because it's heavier and less fuel efficient than carbon fibre. So an example of a business that we think has lots of growth ahead. Now, despite having a sort of high conviction portfolio of only 25 businesses, We do have a decent amount of diversification, so we try to manage risk in different ways. One way is by having businesses across a range of different countries, but also in different industries. And although we do have this growth focus, which leads us towards sort of healthcare, technology, and consumer, we always have a decent number of holdings in the industrial, financial, and energy sector as well, which provides some nice diversification for different points in the cycle. Now, before I get into a few examples of our investments, I wanted to talk about our investment style. A question I get asked really commonly is, how do we narrow down the universe? I'm literally allowed to invest in pretty much any business outside of Australia and New Zealand. So there's a huge universe out there. But we are helped by Marlin having a really quite clearly defined investment style. So we invest in businesses with high quality businesses, so they have some form of competitive advantage. Some investors call this an economic moat around their business. So we want that, but we also want a long growth runway. So we want to be able to see years and years of growth ahead. We don't want to invest in a business that has the chance of growth slowing or hitting a wall at some point in the next few years. But then the difficult part comes after that, and that's trying to buy those sort of businesses at attractive prices, and that's the catch. So businesses that fit in that camp or that first bucket are businesses like MasterCard or Google, and because of their competitive advantage and the strength of their historical growth and the future prospects, the market's generally underappreciated these businesses, and every year they tend to surprise a little bit, which is what's driven alpha from these names. So the second point is we have this research-intensive investment process. So between the three of us and the team, we meet probably 150 different companies a year. We're on the road probably 20 weeks a year. And despite all of the research that goes in, all the travel, all the businesses that we meet, we might only invest in 5. But we're not trading in and out of stocks on a daily basis. We're not trying to time the market. We generally think that the market short-termism can actually give us some opportunities. And a good example of that is our investment in PayPal. So we invested in PayPal shortly after it IPO'd. It actually spun off from eBay back in 2015. But you may remember at the time there was a huge amount of noise around Apple launching Apple Pay. And for someone looking at PayPal, that was somewhat nerve-wracking because there was a huge amount of press about how Apple Pay with their resources and their customer base would be a really strong competitor to PayPal. Now it turns out it was a pretty good time to be building a position in PayPal, and ultimately it turned out that it was extremely hard to break into the payment space, even for Apple. So PayPal had a 15-year lead. They had about 13 million merchants that basically relied on PayPal for payment, and they had 200 million users all across the globe that trusted PayPal. And trust is something that's extremely important in digital payments. You're putting your credit card in, you don't want to do that on every single website. If you can just give it to one party, that means quite a lot to a lot of people. And it became extremely hard for Apple to make meaningful inroads into that market. So then, this is an example of value being unlocked over time as other participants in the market started to catch on that Apple Pay wasn't really going to crack this market. The share price started to re-rate quite significantly. Now, our financial year is to 30 June, so these numbers are to 30 June. So over the last year, the Marlin portfolio has delivered gross performance of 27%, about 6% hit our benchmark. And a lot of the outperformance has been driven by growth stories that are a little bit like the PayPal story. And MasterCard's another company that we have owned for a number of years, and despite it being a household name, it just continues to surprise on the upside. So in being based in New Zealand, we tend to take this for granted, but we are really early adopters of debit and credit card and things like PayWave. If you travel to Europe or the US, you'll probably be surprised. They might not take card, a lot of people use cash. They certainly don't use PayWave yet, and in the US you'll swipe your card and you often still have to physically sign for something. So as they take friction out of this process around the world, people tend to reach for their card a lot more than cash. And in fact, about 80% of the world's transactions still occur in cash. So we think both MasterCard and Visa actually have a long runway for growth ahead as we've generally moved away from cash. But they're also starting to use their network for business-to-business payments, and that's something that investors are only starting to focus on now. And that their network is also it's very efficient. It doesn't take many people to operate it. It's essentially just a bunch of servers, So every bit of volume they get is very, very high margin, so their margins keep tracking up year after year as well. So that's just a couple of examples of companies in our portfolio that I've talked about today. There are obviously another 20 or so that I haven't talked about, but needless to say they have similar sort of growth stories or investment ideas behind each of them. So we do believe in taking a long-term view, and we think that if you stick to a particular investment process and try and get really good at that process, there are different ways of investing. Everyone's got a different approach, but our view is you need to stick to your knitting and do what you know. We've done that. It hasn't resulted in great performance every single year, and no one will deliver great performance every year. But over the long run, it has been rewarded for Marlin. We've outperformed our benchmark over the last year, 5 years, and since inception back in 2007. So just to recap why it's worth investing in international shares and why we think it's worth investing in Marlin. First of all, Marlin does provide a really simple way of investing offshore and getting access to some of these great businesses. It's invested on the NZX, so that makes it quite simple. But also you know that there's a team constantly looking after the portfolio and watching out for which businesses might get disrupted and trying to avoid those ones and potentially trying to benefit from some of the ones that are doing the disruption. And then secondly, and really important, which is why I have a decent amount of my money in some of in offshore shares and products like Marlin, is because foreign shares aren't correlated with the New Zealand economy. They're not driven by domestic New Zealand forces. So if we have a downturn in New Zealand, having some foreign exposure could really protect your portfolio in that scenario. And then just finally, Marlin has a tax efficient pie structure. We pay a quarterly dividend. A lot of our shareholders say they like that. We pay about 2% of NAV out every quarter, so that equates to about 8% of NAV every year. So it's a reasonably high dividend yield. So that's it from me, and I'll be happy to take any questions about international investing or Marlin. Okay, very good.
I'm not sure why Mo's running out the room when Owen gets up to speak anyway. So last talk to us this evening is Owen from Meridian Energy. Thank you.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. So back to talking about a largely New Zealand company on the very interesting topic of electricity. Now, if I said to you on average you spend 7 minutes thinking about electricity, it's 7 minutes a year. You can't really see electricity. You touch enough of it, you die. It's not what we call a high engagement product. In fact, it's the very opposite. It's a low engagement product. So, why would you think about investing in a company that sells a low engagement product? Well, if you invest in the New Zealand market, it's pretty hard to avoid an electricity company. There are 5 of us, and we are quite common in some ways. We both retail and generate electricity, vary in size, but we're a big part of the New Zealand market. And one of the characteristics of the electricity companies is that they are stable and highly cash generative businesses, often get called defensive investments. And we've all been competing hard in a market over the last 10 years that has seen very little demand growth for electricity, and I'll touch on that later. But what that has meant for investors is these companies aren't investing significant amounts of the money they generate in new investment. They're sending it back to shareholders in the form of elevated dividends. And you can see here I've highlighted Meridian's return well above that average 10% that Mo talked about in the last 5 years. So given it's a crowded space, what makes Meridian stand out? Well, we're the big gorilla. So we're the $8.5 billion company. We only make electricity out of renewable generation. And we're the only electricity company based in New Zealand that's also overseas. So we have generation and customers in Australia, and we have customers in the UK. We have a very big customer that sits at the bottom of the South Island that makes aluminium. We'll talk a little bit about that. And we have a very long-term relationship with them. And we have a very strong sustainability focus as well. Now Clement described it really well, but I'll just what he said. For us, we play an essential role in New Zealand society, and we have uber long-term assets. So sustainability is a key part of us. But the thing that really makes Meridian different is the quality of its assets. We've got 7 big hydro stations in New Zealand, backed by a significant amount of dam storage, and it makes these plants really flexible. You can turn them on, you can turn them off. Of that $8.5 billion, about $8 billion are our assets. And we spend a whopping $60 million a year on those assets. They are really efficient and they don't require a lot of capital. And that makes them highly valuable, obviously. The fact that we can store water behind our power stations gives us flexibility, and that allows us to incorporate other types of generation into our portfolio, particularly wind. Now, the wind will blow over the course of a year, generally pretty consistently. But if you compare 1 hour of wind, say today, with the same day last year, it could be wildly different. That's the nature of wind. And they're big assets. These are huge scale things. To give you an idea, this is the Benmore Power Station, midway down the Waitaki Valley. It's one of 8 stations on that chain, 6 of which are ours. Take a bathtub full of water and run that through all 8 power stations. That'll power your house for 2 months. 1 bathtub full of water. The Manapuri Power Station in the Fiordland National Park, it'll power a third of New Zealand's homes on its own. And look, while our wind assets are nothing of that scale, what they do provide is enough power to generate all the homes in a city the size of Christchurch. So these are very, very big stations. And that sounds great. I mean, as an investor, you're investing in big, hard assets. The challenge is what sits behind the dams. New Zealand doesn't have a lot of fuel storage. So to give you an idea, the biggest lake that we have, Lake Pukaki in the Mackenzie Basin, it holds about 40% of New Zealand's hydro storage. It's got a 15-metre operating range. That runs out in 3 months. So unless it rains, we can run out of water. And that is the big challenge that Meridian and New Zealand Power sector manage. We don't have enough fuel all the time to meet the needs of the industry in terms of demand. So we are a fuel-constrained country. It's not all bad though. That's our main operational risk. We spend a lot of time managing it, and the lights don't really go off too much. Right. This is blank, not because we don't make any money, but we wouldn't be doing the electricity industry any justice if I didn't put up one complicated chart. So how do we actually make money? Well, the thing to remember, and your eyes might glaze over pretty quickly, but there are actually 2 electricity markets in New Zealand. There's a retail market and there's a wholesale market. Now when you pay your power bill as a retail customer, that's revenue for us. We have a whole lot of wholesale customers that we have contracts with as well. Some of them we supply electricity, others are financial contracts. The biggest one of those is the aluminium smelter. And then the generation that we make out of our power stations, that gets sold into the wholesale market as well. So this looks great. We're making revenue in all these markets, and unfortunately the graph starts to go down now, because the other key point to remember is this is us selling our generation. We don't keep it, and we don't use it for our own customers. So what we provide down here in terms of supply is we have to buy back off the wholesale market that we sold our generation into, and that's the big cost for us. So there's 2 markets. Meridian doesn't keep its generation. It sells it into a wholesale market. It buys it back out from its wholesale market what its customers need. Now sometimes we buy other people's generation if our fuel levels are particularly low in our lakes, for example, or it's not blowing. But once we have that generation, we sell it. We sell it back into the wholesale market. And we do that in Australia as well, buying and selling electricity. And then we have a whole bunch of costs involved in maintaining the link between the North and the South Island. And everybody's meant to pay for that, it's just Meridian pays most of it, more than we should. When others use it, they get it for free and we get no benefit, but we sort of pay for it. So we've been arguing that case for a decade and nothing has really happened yet, but it will change eventually. Wouldn't hazard a guess as to how long. And then we have a whole bunch of costs in running our business, maintaining our assets, our IT systems, our people. We have large concrete structures sitting on fault lines. They take a bit of insurance. $666 million of EBITDA in 2018. team. It's a big number for a big company. Now, you might think that sounds great. Is Meridian about to have a Queensland taxi licence moment? What's going to disrupt the industry? Well, perhaps the place to start is that thing I mentioned about demand being flat. So the last decade has seen not a lot of demand growth. And despite some of the fundamentals of the New Zealand economy being really positive, again, what Mo talked about, migration, growth in GDP, New Zealand's experienced a lot of industrial and manufacturing closure, particularly immediately after the GFC. So that's taken a chunk of electricity demand away, and it's never come back in the same form. It's getting warmer, technology is getting more energy efficient. They're all sort of factors that affect it. However, it's expected to grow. And as electricity demand grows, and there are varying views on this, from the very optimistic to the less so, more generation is going to be needed in New Zealand. And as a result of that, we are firmly focused on developing new wind capability. And New Zealand has an awesome wind resource for making electricity. It's probably twice as efficient here to make electricity out of wind as it is anywhere else in the world. Two skinny islands surrounded by lots of ocean, it blows. And wind technology is rapidly improving. So to give you an idea, and I'll touch on this a little bit later too, but in Wellington, there's Brooklyn Hill out the back of Wellington. It's got a wind turbine on it. The new one that we put in there in 2016 generates 4 times as much power as the first one that went in there. So, what's making the demand forecasts go up? Well, the real tailwind for the sector comes from the government's commitment to climate change. And if you look at the pie chart here, the big problem New Zealand has is half of its carbon emissions come from cows. Now, electricity is not going to solve that problem. But the other half of the emissions come from essentially fossil fuel-based sectors. Transport, what we call stationary energy, which is manufacturing, processing, all that sort of thing. They're largely done, or largely powered today by burning coal. So there's a huge opportunity to electrify those, halve New Zealand's carbon emissions, and add something like 75% to today's electricity demand. Now that isn't all going to turn up at once. So if you think about heavy road transport, for example, the electric truck proposition is only in its early stages of development. If every single person changed their car to an electric vehicle, that would add about 17% to demand. But there's a lot of other stuff, particularly in industrial processing, that relies on coal, things like dairy, for example. And look, that sounds great, but it isn't without its challenges, because as demand grows, like I said, we need more generation assets. And the problem we have is the consenting process is very difficult in New Zealand. You want to build a new generation asset, the Resource Management Act is a difficult thing to get through. And as a result, people have consented quite a lot of new generation options, but they're not needed right now. They're needed in the middle and the back half of the next decade. By then, the consents have run out. So there's a big challenge in terms of consenting new developments and consenting or reconsenting existing ones. And I mean, that has to happen. If electricity demand grows anything like the graph I showed you, a lot of stuff's going to need to get built. And the thing that will get built in New Zealand will largely be wind, because the wind is so good. And people generally like wind farms. They generally like them when they can't see them. But New Zealand's going to have to get over that. The reality is, in the future, you won't be able to drive from Auckland to Taupo, for example, and not see a whole lot more wind farms. And part of the challenge is they're getting bigger. So more efficient wind farms are simply bigger wind farms. And the technology inside them is different. But to give you an idea, we're looking at a wind farm in Northern Hawke's Bay. It has, it stands at the peak, so when the blade is pointing up, it's about 3/4 of the height of the Sky Tower. So it's 180 metres off the ground. Meridian is a utility. Utilities generally tend to attract a degree of regulation. Like I said, the government's policy push around climate change is highly supportive of the industry, we think. Less so is the current coalition government's insistence on doing an electricity price review. I first report on that has come out. And look, it generally gives the industry a fairly clean bill of health, but it does leave some room for potential policy development. There are some aspects of the industry that we, as a retailer, don't particularly like. Now, if you get a bill, you generally get offered a prompt payment discount. If you pay within a certain time, you get 10, 15, 20, 26% off your bill. What we find, or what we have found through the electricity price review work in particular, is that the people who can't afford to pay are the ones who generally don't get the benefit of that discount. Now, most of them end up paying, but there's an arbitrary time set on the bill. You don't pay within that, you don't get the discount. So we've decided enough of that. We are going to replace that prompt payment discount with a guaranteed credit. So as long as you pay your bill, you get the credit. It's not determined if you pay it within a certain number of days. And that's costing us money. That cost Meridian about $5 million to do that. But that $5 million largely goes back into low-income households. And that's one of the issues in New Zealand, is there are people who struggle to pay their power bill at times during the year, and it's a complex social issue. New Zealand is largely a low-wage economy. Cost of living is comparatively high. People live in poor quality homes that are badly insulated, and people heat them with cheap, inefficient appliances. So there's a big social issue there. The industry can't solve that on its own, but it has a role to play in it. And that's one of the outcomes from that price review. So we think there are other changes that has identified that will be very good, particularly around how electricity gets distributed in New Zealand. But more will come on that. And I mentioned about transmission pricing and how Meridian plays a disproportionate share of the inter-island link. That's in the mix as well. But to give you an idea, you know, New Zealand has one of the best electricity systems in the world, and you only have to go to Australia to get an example of what a bad one looks like. So Australia largely generates electricity from burning dirty brown coal. When it gets really hot in Australia, there isn't enough electricity to run everybody's air conditioning, and blackouts occur. And politically, I think someone mentioned earlier that politicians change pretty frequently in Australia. Well, no one could really agree on how Australia should deal with this, and as a result, it's one of the biggest emitters in the world of carbon. What else might happen? Well, I mentioned the Tiwai Point aluminium smelter. Bear in mind, Meridian doesn't supply the smelter with electricity. The smelter buys its electricity out of the wholesale market. We guarantee the price that it pays. And people speculate how long this plant's going to be here. It's been operating a long time. Our view has always been, and will continue to be, that we don't think the smelter will close. The contract runs through to 2030. But that plant in that picture is 12% of New Zealand's electricity consumption right here. So we spend a lot of time thinking about, well, what happens if we're wrong? What happens if we do go? Now the market will adjust, but it will certainly be a period of disruption while that adjustment occurs. You can't lose 12% out demand out of any market without some form of disruption. And there's lots of reasons why we think they're staying. Aluminium pricing is comparatively good to where it's been. In fact, they're expanding their operations down there by signing a new contract with us around additional plumb line. And it's going to cost them a lot of money to remediate that site if they do close. So we think it looks pretty good for the smelter. Right, what about centralised electricity generation just being superseded by everybody doing it themselves? Well, rooftop solar in New Zealand is increasing. The economics aren't great, but they are slowly improving. But the reality is, New Zealand's not a sunny place. Peak demand for electricity is in winter, hitting water and space. That doesn't align very well with how solar works. That said, there is development in some areas, and we're a big player, or comparatively big player in commercial solar. So some sites, particularly things like shopping malls that have daytime usage of electricity, their profile is well suited to solar development. And you'll often see pictures of huge solar plants sitting out in the desert in places like California or even Australia. Well, we don't see that happening in New Zealand, partly for the reasons I've just talked about, but also flatland in New Zealand is highly desirable for agriculture, and it's just really expensive. Whereas in Australia, the desert doesn't cost much because no one lives there, no one wants it. And so you're also seeing quite big uptake of big grid-scale solar in Australia. You're also seeing lots of solar panels on the roofs in Australia, and that's because it's been subsidised by the government, and that's not happening here. And Australia is sunny, and the demand for electricity peaks in Australia in summer. Like I said, everybody runs their air conditioning. But people are going to put panels on their roofs, not necessarily for economic reasons. We are part of that process. We buy back surplus solar generation from our customers, and we try and make sure people understand information about solar, because it's a highly fragmented supply chain, and people often go into it without fully understanding the costs. Batteries are the other ones that come up. And what batteries really do, they're ways of storing electricity in very short periods of time and moving them between consumption periods. And New Zealand's got huge batteries, but they're just full of water, which is ungenerated electricity, as opposed to a battery like this, which has got generated electricity in it. And to give you an idea, that storage lake that I talked about previously, Lake Pukeki, which is about 40% of the country's storage in it, that's equivalent to 143 million Tesla Powerwalls. And it can store electricity in the form of water for months. And that's what New Zealand needs. It needs storage lasting that period of time. The system doesn't really need people to store electricity for short periods of time yet. But as these things here, electric vehicles increase, people's consumption habits of electricity is going to change. So if you've got an EV, you come home, say at the end of the day, what do you do with it? You plug it in. Now if everybody plugs their car in at the same time, peak demand in the system is going to be way higher than it is now. So that's an issue for the electricity sector to deal with. But the reality is, for most New Zealanders in the future, you won't have a battery that looks like this. You'll have a battery that looks like this. It'll have wheels. So when you come home, you can plug your car in and it can power your house through a peak period of demand. So that's kind of the role that batteries might play, and then they, from an infrastructure point of view, they serve a role as well. And you might think, enough of Meridian and these other electricity companies, I'm going to put solar array on my roof and put 15 batteries in my garage. You can do that. It'll be about a 20-year payback. It'll cost you $100,000. Okay. The subsidies aren't there for things like batteries and solar in New Zealand, because we've already got 85 to 90% renewable electricity generation. So New Zealand hasn't got an electricity system that needs to decarbonise like Australia does. Okay, what about catastrophic climate change? What happens if it stops raining? Well, we've got 100 years of rain data and it hasn't stopped raining. But if you're planning a camping trip in the Mackenzie country, you might want to think about the time of year you go, because we have seen seasonal changes in inflow. So go in autumn, don't go in summer, would be the outtake. And if you're a skier in New Zealand, snow line is rising as it gets warmer. And glaciers are getting smaller. Now Meridian is reliant on glacial snow melt for some of its inflows. So that might sound bad, but in reality it's getting wetter in all our catchments. And certainly in terms of a 50-year weather projection, which is what we look at, it's likely to be wetter again. Warm air carries more moisture. So bigger individual rainstorms, largely in the west of New Zealand, particularly in the South Island. In the east, conversely, it's forecast to get a lot drier. Those are irrigation areas. Pumping water uses electricity, it's good for demand. And you'll know it's getting warmer everywhere. It's actually getting windier everywhere too. So again, that looks promising. So that sounds great. But we aren't immune to climate change. What we are seeing is increasing variability in terms of the overall trend being positive. But month to month, the conditions are changing quite a bit. And the other problem we have is individual rain events are getting bigger. So if you are camping in autumn in the Waitaki Valley and you suddenly get a text from Meridian saying, get out from beside the river, don't hang around to watch the water come down, because it might look like this. And actually, just as a point, this is actually one of the contact images there. There are two little black dots there. Those are people standing there watching it. I'm going to be those people. And look, finally, just to wrap up, what do you get if you buy Meridian? Well, like I said, a highly cash generative business. We've got low capital needs. Those low capital needs will last at least a decade. That's how far we are away from significant refurbishment on our big generation assets. We've got a high cash flow payout, and we've got a dividend policy boosted by a capital management program, which is special dividends, that runs to 2022. But you also get growth. You get growth out of the New Zealand market, we hope, in terms of our retail business. We've got 100,000 customers in Australia, we want to quadruple that. And we're in the UK market, and the UK market has got lots of upside. We've put on more customers in 2 months in the UK than we did in a year in New Zealand. But we are reliant on a franchise partner there to execute on that. That's me. Thank you. I'm here for a beer, so if you've really got a question on electricity, you can ask me then if you like. How does that sound?
Beer sounds good. So I just wanted to close up and say thank you very much for coming this evening. I'd like to again thank Link Market Services for sponsoring the event. This is the second time we've done this, as I mentioned, in Auckland, so we'd really appreciate any feedback. We wanted to showcase different listed issuers to you tonight, and I think we heard from 4 very different companies, even though 2 of you had some Fish Alliance there going on. So my last thanks must be to Mo, to Don, Clement, Owen and Ashley. But thank you very much.
If you Google it, they do things in conjunction with So there's a lot of research stuff on that you can read. It's a good source of information. So as well as reading stuff, don't knock that over. Website.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. So essentially, it's a business portfolio. It comes out on an Australian one. So the New Zealand fund as well. Yes.
Subscribe to it. But they have stuff in the stands for the national they have stuff on articles and information on that you don't get in New Zealand.
It's funny.
That's right. And we do write a little bit about.
It's very funny. It's like in real news, that sort of thing. Like massively complicated industry.
Some shareholders have a lot of good stuff.
Go into a website, you can just join us stuff. And then also the Marlin itself. We manage the Marlin with the company. So Marlin is just published as all managed guys. So all the companies we based on sort of wide
these lower stuff on there. When an annual general meeting comes up,
do you in New Zealand or
how they vote? In other words, if there's anything contentious, they say, well, don't vote for